What would you do if your own daughter-in-law locked you inside your house, snatched your car keys, and demanded you cook dinner for 15 people? All in under an hour. I thought I'd seen it all, but nothing prepared me for the chaos that unfolded next. Trust me, you won't believe how this night ended, or who got the last laugh. Stay with me, because you do not want to miss this story. There are days in a woman's life when she just wants to slip away quietly, unnoticed, and enjoy a little peace. For me, that day was last Thursday. I'd been looking forward to my weekly bingo night all week, a sacred tradition, a little slice of freedom, and let's be honest, the only time I get to wear my lucky turquoise sweater and gossip with the girls without anyone asking me where the remote is or if we're out of milk. I had my purse on my arm, my keys in my hand, and a spring in my step. I was halfway out the door, humming a tune from the 70s when the universe decided to play a cruel joke on me. Enter Blythe, my daughter-in-law. Now, don't get me wrong, I love her, I really do. She's smart, ambitious, and she makes my son Heath happy. But she also has a way of sweeping into a room like a tornado, rearranging everything in her path, and leaving you wondering what just happened. That day, she came in with her phone glued to her ear, her heels clicking on the tile, and a look on her face that said, "I'm about to change your plans, and you're not going to like it." Before I could even say hello, she snatched my car keys right out of my hand. I blinked, thinking maybe she was just borrowing them for a second. But no, she marched straight to the front gate, locked it with a loud, definitive click, and turned to face me with the kind of determination you usually see in Olympic athletes or toddlers who want a cookie before dinner. "You're not going anywhere," she declared, her voice echoing through the hallway. "My whole family is coming for dinner in an hour. Hurry up, clean everything, fry the steaks, make the salad and dessert for 15 people. 15! Not 5, not 10, 15! I stood there, mouth open, clutching my now useless purse, wondering if I'd accidentally signed up for a reality show called Mother-in-Law Mayhem. I half expected a camera crew to pop out from behind the curtains and start filming my reaction. Have you ever felt like you were suddenly the star of your own sitcom? Because that's exactly how I felt. Only in this episode, the laugh track was missing, and the only prize was a mountain of dirty dishes. Blythe didn't even wait for me to respond. She rattled off a list of instructions. "Don't forget to dust the living room, and make sure the steaks are medium rare. My dad hates them any other way. Oh, and the kids are allergic to nuts, so no pecans in the dessert." Before grabbing her briefcase and heading out the door. "I have an important meeting, so I'll be back just before dinner." "Thanks, Marlene," she called over her shoulder, as if she'd just asked me to water her plants, not host a small army. The door slammed shut, and I was left standing in the middle of my own home, a prisoner in my own kitchen, with nothing but a to-do list the length of the Mississippi River and a growing sense of dread. I glanced at the clock. 58 minutes until showtime. My heart started racing. I could feel the panic rising in my chest, threatening to spill over into full-blown hysteria. But then something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the years of raising 3 kids on a shoestring budget, or the countless PTA meetings I'd survived, or maybe it was just the stubborn streak I inherited from my mother. Whatever it was, I squared my shoulders, took a deep breath, and marched into the kitchen. First things first, the steaks. I yanked open the fridge and stared at the mountain of raw meat Blythe had dumped on the bottom shelf. 15 steaks, all different cuts, all needing to be cooked to perfection. I muttered a prayer to Julia Child and started seasoning them, trying to remember who liked what. Medium rare for her dad Wendell, well done for her Aunt Fern, rare for her cousin Corbin who thought he was a vampire. I fired up the grill pan and got to work, the sizzle of the meat drowning out the sound of my own grumbling. Next up, the salad. I rummaged through the crisper drawer, pulling out lettuce, tomatoes, cucumbers, and a suspicious-looking avocado. I chopped, I tossed, I even tried to make it look fancy by adding a few sprigs of parsley. I was halfway through slicing the tomatoes when the phone rang. It was my friend Darla, calling to see if I was on my way to bingo. I glanced longingly at my purse, still sitting by the door, and sighed. "Darla, you wouldn't believe the day I'm having," I whispered, glancing over my shoulder as if Blythe might burst back in at any moment. "I've been taken hostage by my own daughter-in-law. She's locked me in and left me with enough steaks to feed the entire state of Texas." Darla laughed so hard I thought she might choke. "Only you, Marlene. Only you." I hung up, feeling a little better. If nothing else, at least I'd have a good story to tell at next week's bingo night, assuming I ever made it out of this dinner alive. Dessert was next. I scanned the pantry looking for inspiration. "No nuts," Blythe had said. I settled on a simple fruit salad with whipped cream, figuring it was safe, easy, and unlikely to set off any allergies. I whipped the cream by hand, cursing the day I gave my electric mixer to my daughter, and tried not to think about the mountain of dishes piling up in the sink. With everything cooking, I dashed around the house, dusting, vacuuming, and fluffing pillows like a woman possessed. I even lit a few candles, hoping the scent of vanilla would mask the smell of panic. Every time I passed the locked gate, I glared at it, half tempted to climb over and make a run for it. But I knew I'd never make it in these old knees, and besides, I couldn't leave the steaks unattended. By the time the hour was up, I was sweaty, exhausted, and covered in flour. My hair was frizzing, my back was aching, and my lucky turquoise sweater was splattered with steak juice. I looked around the kitchen, surveying the chaos, and couldn't help but laugh. If this was mother-in-law mayhem, I was definitely winning the grand prize for effort. As I set the last dish on the table, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. I looked like I'd been through a war, and in a way I had. But I'd survived, and as I heard the sound of my son's car pulling into the driveway, I straightened my shoulders, wiped my hands on my apron, and prepared to face the next round. After all, if there's one thing I've learned in all my years, it's that you can lock the gate, but you can't lock down a determined mother-in-law. And as for Blythe, well, she was in for a surprise of her own. The moment Blythe's heels clicked out the door and the lock on the gate snapped shut, I realized I was about to compete in the culinary Olympics. Except there were no medals, just a mountain of expectations and a ticking clock. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and told myself, channel your inner Julia Child Marlene. You've survived PTA bake sales, Thanksgiving with the in-laws, and that time the oven caught fire during Christmas dinner. You can do this. But as I surveyed the chaos in my kitchen, I wondered if Julia Child ever had to cook for 15 people with only an hour's notice and a daughter-in-law who just locked her in. First, the steaks. Oh, the steaks! Blythe had left a note on the counter, as if I needed more instructions. Dad likes his medium rare, Aunt Fern wants hers well done, the twins only eat theirs with ketchup, and Uncle Wendell is on a diet, no butter. I stared at the pile of raw meat, all different cuts, and tried to remember who was who. I lined them up on the counter like little soldiers, seasoned them with salt, pepper, and a prayer, and fired up the grill pan. The sizzle was satisfying, but the smoke alarm was less so. Within minutes, the kitchen was filled with the smell of searing beef and the shrill beeping of the alarm. I waved a dish towel at the ceiling, muttering, if only I could wave this and make Blythe reappear to help. While the steaks cooked, I dashed to the fridge for salad ingredients. Lettuce, tomatoes, cucumbers, carrots, thank goodness for pre-washed greens. I chopped and tossed like a woman possessed, trying to make it look as if I'd spent hours on it instead of minutes. I even found a half-forgotten avocado in the back of the fridge, which I sliced and fanned out on top, feeling just a little bit fancy. But as I reached for the salad dressing, I realized I was out of ranch, of course, because why would anything go smoothly today? I quickly whipped up a vinaigrette with olive oil, vinegar, and a dash of mustard, hoping no one would notice the difference. If they complain, I muttered, they can take it up with Blythe. Next up, dessert. Blythe's warning echoed in my head. No nuts. I scanned the pantry and settled on a fruit salad. Safe, simple, and unlikely to cause a trip to the ER. I chopped apples, oranges, and grapes, tossing them together with a squeeze of lemon to keep them from browning. But as I reached for the whipped cream, I realized I'd given my electric mixer to my daughter last month. Of course, I grabbed a whisk and started beating the cream by hand, my arm burning after just a few minutes. This must be what CrossFit feels like, I thought, sweat dripping down my forehead. Who needs a gym membership when you've got a kitchen full of hungry relatives? The clock was ticking, and I was moving at warp speed. Every time I glanced at the time, my heart raced a little faster. 40 minutes left. 30-20. I wiped my brow with the back of my hand, only to realize I'd smeared flour across my face. I caught a glimpse of myself in the microwave door, hair frizzing, cheeks flushed, apron askew, and burst out laughing. If Julia Child could see me now, I said to the mop leaning in the corner, she'd probably pour me a glass of wine and tell me to order pizza. At one point, I actually considered using the mop as a broomstick and flying over the gate to freedom. I pictured myself soaring through the air, landing gracefully on the other side, and making a break for the bingo hall. But reality set in. My knees aren't what they used to be, and besides, I'd probably end up in the ER with a broken hip and a story that no one would believe. So I stayed grounded, and so did the mess. The kitchen looked like a war zone. There were steak juices splattered on the stove, salad greens on the floor, and a trail of flour leading from the pantry to the counter. The sink was overflowing with dirty dishes, and the trash can was already full. I tried to clean as I went, but it was like bailing water out of a sinking ship with a teaspoon. Every time I turned around, there was another mess to tackle. I started talking to myself just to keep my spirits up. You've got this, Marlene. You've handled worse. Remember that time the dog ate the Thanksgiving turkey, or when the twins decided to paint the living room walls with ketchup. This is nothing. But as the minutes ticked by, the pressure mounted. I could feel the anxiety creeping in, threatening to overwhelm me. What if I burned the steaks? What if the salad wilted? What if the dessert was a disaster and everyone blamed me? I tried to push the thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand. One thing at a time, I told myself. Just keep moving. I set the table with my best dishes, the ones I usually save for holidays. If I was going to be forced into hosting a dinner party, I might as well do it in style. I even found the fancy napkins Blythe had given me last Christmas, still in the package, of course. I folded them into little fans, just like I'd seen on TV, and placed them at each setting. For a moment, I felt a surge of pride. Maybe I couldn't escape, but I could make this dinner look good. With 10 minutes to spare, I surveyed my handiwork. The steaks were resting on a platter, the salad was chilling in the fridge, and the fruit salad looked colorful and inviting. The kitchen was still a mess, but I'd managed to clear enough space to serve the food. I took a deep breath, wiped my hands on my apron, and tried to calm my racing heart. And then, just as I was about to collapse into a chair, the phone rang. It was my friend Darla again, checking in. "Marlene, are you still alive over there?" she asked, her voice full of concern and a little bit of amusement. "Barely," I replied, glancing at the clock. "If I survive this, I'm never letting Blythe near my car keys again." Darla laughed. "You're a trooper, Marlene. You've got this." I hung up, feeling a little better. Maybe I wasn't Julia Child, but I was a survivor. I'd faced the kitchen Olympics and lived to tell the tale. And as I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway, I knew the real challenge was about to begin. But for now, I allowed myself a small victory dance, right there in the middle of the chaos, mop in hand, flour on my face, and a smile on my lips. Because sometimes you just have to laugh at the madness and keep going. After all, if you can't escape, you might as well enjoy the ride. Just as I was about to collapse into a heap of potato peels and steak juice, the front door creaked open. I didn't even have the energy to look up at first. My knees were aching, my back was screaming, and my hair was sticking out in every direction. I was surrounded by the aftermath of my kitchen Olympics. Flour on the ceiling, salad on the floor, and a trail of dirty dishes that looked like a tornado had swept through. I was clutching a spatula like a weapon, ready to defend my territory from any more surprises. If anyone had walked in at that moment, they might have thought I'd lost my mind, or at least my grip on reality. But then I heard the familiar sound of my son Heath's voice, tired and bewildered, and I looked up to see him standing in the doorway. He looked like he'd just run a marathon in a suit. His tie was askew, his shirt was untucked, and there were dark circles under his eyes that told me he'd had a long day at work. He froze, eyes wide, taking in the scene before him. Flour on the ceiling, don't ask. Salad on the floor. The bowl had slipped out of my hands during a particularly frantic moment, and me, wild-eyed and brandishing a spatula like a sword. "Mom, what happened here?" he whispered, as if afraid the stakes might attack him if he spoke too loudly. For a split second, I wanted to laugh, cry, and maybe throw a steak at him for good measure. After all, he was the reason I had a daughter-in-law who thought locking me in my own house was a perfectly reasonable way to get dinner on the table. But instead, I just took a deep breath, tried to smooth my hairs, which only made it worse, and said, "Welcome home, honey. Dinner for 15 surprise." Heath blinked, clearly trying to process what I just said. 15, as in 1-5 people? I nodded, gesturing around the kitchen with my spatula. "Blythe's family." She locked the gate, took my car keys, and left me with a to-do list that would make Martha Stewart cry. "I've been running around like a headless chicken for the past hour, and if I never see another steak again, it'll be too soon." Heath let out a low whistle and stepped carefully over a pile of potato peels. "Wow, she really did it this time, didn't she?" I shrugged, trying to keep the mood light. "Oh, you know your wife. When she wants something done, she makes sure it gets done. By someone else." He grinned, but I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He dropped his briefcase by the door and rolled up his sleeves. "Well, I'm here now. What can I do to help?" For a moment, I just stared at him. My son, the man who once thought peanut butter and jelly was a gourmet meal, was offering to help me finish dinner for 15 people. I almost burst into tears right then and there, but I managed to hold it together. "You can start by picking up that salad before someone slips and breaks a hip," I said, handing him a towel. He got to work, and together we started to bring some order to the chaos. He swept up the salad, wiped down the counters, and even managed to rescue a few wayward steak pieces from the floor. I finished plating the rest of the food, and for the first time all day, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we might actually pull this off. As we worked, I filled him in on the whole story. He listened, shaking his head in disbelief, and every now and then he'd mutter something under his breath about Blythe's creative problem-solving skills. I could tell he was torn between being amused and being annoyed, but mostly he just seemed grateful that I hadn't completely lost my mind. "Mom, I'm sorry," he said at one point, pausing to catch his breath. I had no idea she was going to do this. I would have said something if I'd known. I waved him off. "It's not your fault, honey. Besides, it's not the first time I've been thrown into the deep end. Remember your 10th birthday party, 20 screaming kids, a magician who got lost, and a cake that melted in the sun. I survived that, didn't I?" Heath laughed, and for a moment the tension melted away. We were just mother and son, working side by side, trying to make the best of a crazy situation. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And sometimes that's all you can ask for. Just as we were putting the finishing touches on the table, the doorbell rang. Hith froze, spatula in hand, and looked at me with wide eyes. "They're here," he whispered, as if we were about to be invaded by a pack of wild animals. I straightened my apron, took a deep breath, and tried to summon what little energy I had left. "Showtime," I said, giving him a reassuring pat on the back. "Let's go greet our guests." We opened the door to a flood of people: Blythe's parents, Fern and Wendell, her siblings Corbin and Tamsin, their spouses, and a gaggle of kids who immediately started running around the house like it was an amusement park. Blythe herself swept in a few minutes later, all smiles and perfectly put together, as if she hadn't just orchestrated the most stressful dinner of my life. "Marlene! Heath, everything looks amazing," she gushed, giving me a quick hug before turning her attention to the food. "I knew you could handle it." I bit back a sarcastic reply and just smiled, letting her believe whatever she wanted. After all, the hard part was over. The food was on the table, the guests were happy, and I'd managed to survive the kitchen Olympics with my sanity mostly intact. As we all sat down to eat, I caught Heath's eye across the table. He gave me a small, grateful smile, and I knew that, despite everything, we'd made it through together. Maybe that's what family is all about: surviving the chaos, picking up the pieces, and finding a way to laugh about it when it's all over. And as I watched Blythe's family dig into the meal I'd worked so hard to prepare, I couldn't help but feel a little proud. I might not have made it to bingo night, but I'd won a different kind of prize: the knowledge that, no matter what life throws at me, I can handle it. With a little help from my son, a lot of humor, and maybe a glass of wine or two at the end of the night. The moment the first car pulled up, I felt a strange mix of dread and relief. The house was as ready as it was ever going to be. The food was hot, or at least warm, and Heath and I had managed to clear enough of the chaos that it looked more like a home and less like a disaster zone. But as the front door opened and Blythe's family began to pour in, hungry, loud, and with the kind of energy only a big family can bring, I braced myself for the final act of this unexpected drama. There was Fern, arms full of Tupperware, just in case, Wendell already asking where the bathroom was, and a parade of siblings, cousins and kids who immediately started running laps around the living room. The noise level shot up to 11, and I had to remind myself to breathe. I pasted on my best hostess smile, the one I'd perfected over decades of family gatherings, and started ushering people toward the dining room. Somehow, by some miracle, the food turned out edible. The steaks were a little more well done than I'd planned, but no one seemed to mind. The salad was a hit, especially with the kids, who picked out the cucumbers and left the rest. The fruit salad disappeared in minutes, and even the whipped cream, hand-beaten, "Thank you very much," got compliments. I watched as plates were filled and refilled, as laughter bounced off the walls, and as the chaos of the day slowly melted into the kind of noisy, joyful mess that only a family dinner can bring. I caught Heath's eye across the table, and he gave me a little wink, as if to say, "See, Mom, you did it." And for a moment, I let myself feel proud. I'd survived the kitchen Olympics, the hostage situation, and the last-minute dinner for 15. If there was a medal for mother-in-law endurance, I'd have earned it that night. Blythe waltzed in about 20 minutes after everyone else, all smiles and perfectly put together, as if she hadn't just left me to fend for myself in the culinary trenches. She breezed through the dining room, greeting her family, complimenting the food, and acting like the queen of the castle. I watched her, amused and just a little bit annoyed, as she accepted praise for the meal she hadn't lifted a finger to help prepare. But I kept my cool. After all, I had a little surprise of my own plan. As the meal wound down and the last bites of dessert were being savored, I stood up and clinked my glass for attention. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice carrying over the chatter. "It's been a real adventure getting this dinner on the table, but I'm so glad we could all be together." There were murmurs of agreement, and Blythe beamed at me, clearly pleased with herself for pulling off such a successful family gathering. That's when I made my move. I walked over to the kitchen, grabbed the mop, and returned to the dining room with a flourish. I handed it to Blythe with a wink and said, "Your turn, dear. I saved the best for you." The look on her face was absolutely priceless. For a split second, she looked like she might protest, but then she caught the glint in my eye and realized I wasn't joking. The whole table went quiet, and then, one by one, people started to laugh. Even Fern chuckled, and Heath nearly spit out his coffee. Blythe tried to recover her composure, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She glanced at the kitchen, which still bore the scars of my earlier battle. Flour on the counter, dishes piled high, and a sticky spot on the floor where the fruit salad had made a daring escape. She took the mop with a tight smile and said, "Of course, Marlene, I'd be happy to help." I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. As she disappeared into the kitchen, I sat back down and let myself relax for the first time all day. The family was still buzzing, the kids were still running wild, and the house was still a mess, but I didn't care. I'd made it through, and I'd managed to remind Blythe, and everyone else, who was really in charge of the kitchen. And the car keys, for that matter. I patted my pocket where I'd quietly slipped the keys earlier, just in case she got any more bright ideas. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of laughter, stories, and second helpings. People lingered at the table, swapping tales of family mishaps and kitchen disasters. Someone brought out an old photo album, and soon we were all crowded around, pointing and laughing at pictures from years gone by. I watched as Heath played with the kids, as Wendell told the same joke for the third time, and as Blythe herself scrubbed the kitchen floor with a determination I had to admire. It wasn't the evening I'd planned, but it was one I'd remember for a long time. As the night wound down and people started to say their goodbyes, I found myself standing at the door, hugging each guest as they left. Blythe gave me a quick, slightly sheepish hug and whispered, "Thanks for everything, Marlene. I owe you one." I just smiled and said, "Don't worry, dear. We all have our days." Heath was the last to leave, and as he hugged me tight, he whispered, "You're amazing, Mom. I don't know how you do it." I just laughed and said, "Years of practice, honey. Years of practice." When the house was finally quiet, I sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and let the events of the day wash over me. I thought about all the times I'd been asked to do the impossible, all the times I'd put my own plans aside for the sake of family, and all the times I'd managed to pull it off. Sometimes with grace, sometimes with a little bit of revenge, but always with love. I thought about Blythe, about how she was still learning what it meant to be part of a big, messy, wonderful family, and about how maybe, just maybe, she'd think twice before locking me in again. So, let me ask you, have you ever been trapped by your own family's demands? Have you ever had to pull off a miracle dinner or clean up a mess you didn't make? What would you have done in my shoes? Drop your stories in the comments. I need to know I'm not alone! And if you enjoyed this little adventure, don't forget to subscribe for more tales from the front lines of family life. After all, we're all in this together, and sometimes a little laughter and a mop is the best revenge of all.